Gemara tells us that there was a Jew. He was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. So you can imagine how special he was. His name was Nochum. Nochum ish Gamzu. He was called Nochum, the man of Gamzu. In Hebrew, the word Gamzu means it's also for the best. Anything that happened in his life was Gamzu L'Tova. It's for the best. You win the $1 billion lottery, of course it's for the best. But even if he'd be being thrown off a cliff, and he's about to be thrown off the cliff, he said it's for the best. And that's the way he processed it. And it wasn't lip service. In reality, it's for the best. It could have been as bleak as not to be described in the negative, Gamzu L'Tova. And it always, because he believed this and he was such a holy man, it always turned out for the best. So there was a story that the Romans, when we were in Israel, they controlled Israel, and they were going to issue a decree against the Jewish people, and they had to send somebody to Rome to be an advocate and to annul the decree. So they didn't know who to pick. So they said, Nochum ish Gamzu, he's the one to pick. Why? Because he's a man who's an adept in miracles. He's a man, whatever happens, he always, through him, miracles always happen. And we need a miracle to overturn this decree. He will be the one to send. You'd say, a man is that humble and that holy, and that you say that we think you're the candidate. What would he do? He immediately, he would shun it. He would say, you're talking to the wrong person. Like I say to Larry, I'd like to give a Talmudic lecture in the biggest, largest yeshiva in the world. He says, I think you got the wrong guy. You realize it's an expression of humility. Yeah. But over here, Nochum Jamzu didn't turn it down because he understood, if he's the man for the job, he's doing it. And immediately he embarked on it. When you go to the Roman emperor, you realize you have to come in with a special gift. I told the story in the past, but it's a Gemara. So they take an ornate wooden box, they fill it with gems and with gold and silver, and this is the gift from the Jewish people. And they put it on a wagon, and he's in this coach. He's going towards Rome from Israel. You realize it's not a one-day trip. So he has to stay over at an inn. He stays over at an inn, and the innkeeper, they were Gentiles, pagans, bad people, and they notice that this Jew, in secrecy, he's unloading this box, and he's burying it not far from the inn, and they watched it, and they realized there must be something very valuable in that box. They unearth the box, they open it up, they see gold and gems, and that was their day. They hit pay dirt, as they say. They hit pay dirt. They empty the chest of gold and gems, and they fill it with earth. And they rebury it. Next day, the simple Jew, in their minds, the simpleton, unearths the box, puts it on his wagon, with a smile on his face, he's going to Rome. They understand he's going to Rome, he's not coming back. Because the moment he presents that box, he's going straight to the gallows. Because you couldn't disgrace the emperor more than that, and they couldn't care what the ramifications are for the Jewish people. Gets to Rome, and he presents it, and he explains why he's there. He's a representative of Jewish people, and this is the gift he's bringing. This ornate chest, they open up, and they find a box filled with dirt. The Roman emperor sees this, he becomes incensed. First, he says, we're going to even make the decree even more severe. This man straight to the gallows. He's going to the gallows. What do you think Nochum ish Gamzu says? Gamzu L'Tova. If that's what's meant to be, it's for the best. Immediately, in the Roman Senate, one of the leading Roman senators gets up and tries to defend this Jew, and it happens to be Eliyahu Novi. God had sent Elijah the prophet in the form of one of the Roman senators, and he says to the emperor, Your Honor, whatever the way they called him, the Jew is not stupid. The Jewish people are not going to do something which is going to jeopardize their existence. If you read in the Bible and in the Talmud, when Avram, their founding forefather, went to war against the four mightiest kings of the world, he was only one person, and he was the victor. How did it happen? God performed a miracle. What did he do? The earth that he picked up, he threw it at the enemies. It was turned into spears and into swords and to arrows. And through that dirt, he vanquished the enemy. It was called miracle earth. Maybe this earth in this box is miracle earth. So before you pass judgment on him and make the decree more severe, let's try it out. So the emperor says, we have a province far from Rome where they've been rebelling against us. Our troops can't put the rebellion down. We'll send this dirt to them. And if they use it and it works, we know that this is more valuable than anything in the world. Could you hold just one moment? And sure enough, they take the dirt, send it out to this far province, and they go and they use it immediately. All the rebellion was quelled immediately. The enemy was killed, and Nochem Ish Gamzu is the hero. They take the box, refill it with gold and gems, even more precious than what he originally had. Sending him back with glory. They annulled the decree and even legislated more positive things for the Jews. Okay, guess what happens? He shows up at the inn. They can't believe it. He's back. The Jew's back. They ask him what happened. So he tells them the story about the earth. So they realize they got a gold mine back there. All this dirt. They fill up a wagon load of dirt. They go on to Rome. And because they're coming back with wealth, which is not to be believed. They show up at the Roman court. They say they want an audience with the emperor. They say, that box of dirt, it came from our backyard. That miracle, we have a full wagon load of it. The emperor says, not a problem. We need more of it. They send it out to the provinces. All the Roman soldiers are killed. This character with his family are sent to the gallows, they're killed. That's Nochem Ish Gamzu. He said he's adept in miracles. For Nochem Ish Gamzu, the miracle happens. For somebody else, it doesn't happen. That's miracle. Now, how do miracles happen? Dirt is dirt. Dirt are not arrows. Dirt is not spears. They're not swords. How does it happen? How do things change? How does a person, if he dies and he decomposes to dust, how does he become alive and a full functioning human being at a level which what his original existence is not comparable to this new level after resurrection? God wills. Everything exists only because God wills it should be. He releases energies which manifest themselves exactly to exist within the context of what it's meant to be. For the tzaddik like Nochem Ish Gamzu, everything is Gamzu Tova. Because he had a function, he had a value, dirt becomes spears, dirt becomes arrows, dirt becomes swords. Meaning nature is only nature because God set the laws of nature. Whenever the laws of nature have to be altered, and how they altered, God just changes the energy flow, or it's a different kind of energy. Because it only manifests itself because that's the way God wants it to manifest itself. Not on the supernatural level. But if we need supernatural, God intervenes, overwrites the system. It's called supernatural. That's the way it works. And that's how resurrection will work. How could you take dust and recreate a human being? If you read the story of creation, God took earth, formed a human being, infused it with a soul. Well, if you take that narrative as fact, so taking dust and willing it to be resurrected, no less. So you tell me you don't believe in the Torah, okay. You tell me it's myths, it's whatever you want to tell me. But if you believe that's the reality, so resurrection is no less than that. If God created the world ex nihilo, so something that exists to turn it into something which is more than it is, there's no question. It's not such a great level of accomplishment. But what is it? God set systems in existence, and the world functions within those systems. Now, this is what I want to tell you, what the Ramchal writes. When we say Gamzu Latova, I'll give you an example. I told over the story. There was a certain person, his mother was Jewish, his father wasn't Jewish. And his father was a famous band leader. And his first name was Nicholas. And he had the non-Jewish name. And he was an intern at Sunrise Securities at Nathan Lowe. And he was becoming a Baal Tshuva observant. And they had to raise capital for a certain project in China, in one of its provinces. They were going to build a foundry. And they put it up for bid. And this young boy, who was 24 years old, I think he was in Brown University, and he was there. He raised a tremendous amount of money for this bid, to bid on it. And they underbid, and they lost the bid. This young boy was in the doghouse. You win some, you lose some. There'll be other opportunities, but this young boy, put his heart and soul into this. He was literally in the doghouse. So as much as Nathan Lowe tried to encourage him and say, it's not the end of the world, there'll be other opportunities, couldn't get out of his doldrums. So they lost it. Whoever bid higher on the project got the project. Okay. They laid the foundation for this foundry. Laying the foundation alone cost about $15 million, just pouring the concrete. That's how big this foundry was. What happens? About a month after it's laid, there's an earthquake in China. The earth shifts, the foundation is cracked. Whatever they put into that foundation was worthless. Word gets back to Nathan. He says to this young boy, didn't I tell you it's for the best? Didn't I tell you it's Gamzu Latova? Turned out it's a blessing. If we would have put the money in there, we would have lost our credibility with our investors. The money would have gone south. Thank God we have the money. We have other projects we put the money in. That's what he said to him at the time. Gamzu Latova. And we could appreciate it. When you see Gamzu Latova in your life, it makes life a lot easier. You miss a plane, like there was a certain guy who had an earache. He was supposed to take a plane out of Philadelphia airport. And the plane went down because he couldn't get on the plane. Although he was maybe disappointed, the lady says, thank God I never got on that plane. Thank God I had an earache. It's Gamzu Latova. You appreciate God saved your life. God wants you to be alive. So there's an immediate understanding of the value of Gamzu Latova. It's for the best. And you see it very often. Person was offered a job in Japan. There's no infrastructure of a Jewish community there. But it's very alluring. The salary, the financial package, everything. And they'll guarantee you come back 3 times a year to the States, but actually living in a non-Jewish environment. One person who's committed Jewishly, he says, I'm passing. Because I'm not going to put my Judaism in jeopardy. Even though I could use the money and it's a stepping stone to other things, I'm passing it. It was a tough bullet to bite. He bit the bullet. Another person, not so simple. He took the job. And originally tried to convince himself, the first one, I'll take it. But you realize, and he was single. He wasn't even married. A single man to go out to that environment without any support system. You're exposed to many things, many temptations. He didn't want to put himself there. This other Jewish person came from an observant family, went out there, got involved with an Oriental girl. And he ended up marrying her. She converted initially, whatever that meant. Of course, he divorced her, Eventually got back, put his life back together Jewishly. Late in retrospect, the second person realized he made a mistake to go there. The first guy, when he heard what happened to the second person, he says, thank God I never went. Just look what happened to this person's life, Judaism-wise. It was a disaster. Okay? That's Gamzu Latova. You see the bracha based on your decision. The Ramchal says, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the tip of the iceberg. We say every day in the Shachar service, God renews creation every moment. What do you mean renews creation? The sky looks like the same. The earth is the earth. The mountains are the mountains. The buildings are still standing. And you have humanity. What does it mean? He renews creation continuously. It's a renewal. So simple means because he continues to will it. But it's even more than that. What is the objective of creation? We have to reach a certain level of perfection. You know, the many roads to achieve it. Let's say humanity, the majority of decisions are positive. So the energy God releases, it's a different kind of energy because the world takes on another dimension of function. If the world doesn't behave, the Jewish people don't behave. You have to have a destruction of the temple. But that's part of, that negative is part of the positive. That's part of the correction. That's part of the atonement. So could you imagine how many balls God has to juggle, so to say? Infinite amount of variables to be able to put this story together that by year 6,000, this world will achieve perfection. That's what has to happen. You can have the most sophisticated computer. We're talking about unlimited pieces of information have to jive and have to continuously change because it has to meet the criteria of reaching the end, which is what? Which is perfection. So when we see Gamzu Latova now, in our lives, it's Gamzu Latova. You say, thank God, it's for the best. Rabbi Beryl Wine, who lives in Israel today, he's a Jewish historian. He has a history series. He tells of a story about the Jews in Cuba that when Batista was there, he was he ran Cuba. Then there was Castro. He actually overthrew the Cuban government. Fidel Castro. Right? Fidel Castro. And what happened was the Jews who were there, most of the Jews came, they became wealthy people there. Many of them fled the Holocaust, or pre-Holocaust, and Jews, they're first-class businessmen. They built factories, when Castro took over, everything was transferred to the government. Anything of value, the bank accounts, the businesses, everything. It was communism. He took it over everything. He was a dictator. Except the Jews themselves, they were very Zionistic. So after the founding state of Israel, somebody from the Sachnut would go there and they would raise money for Israel, for the building the state of Israel. It was an infant state, a fledgling state. So they sold Israeli bonds. And Jews were wealthy. Jews had bonds, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 bonds. They had all these bonds. When Castro confiscated their assets, you know what he confiscated? Their hard assets, the bank accounts, their homes, their jewelry, their businesses. What does it take? Paper. Israel, it's a fledgling state. What's it worth? It's worth nothing. So many of these Jews, when they left with the shirts on the back they moved to Florida, many of them. That's the Jewish Cuban community in Florida. They took satchels filled with these Israeli bonds. When they came to America, eventually those bonds were worth a fortune. They could cash it in for its value. So if a man had $500,000 worth of Israeli bonds, he cashed it in. If he would have had cash, he would have nothing. So it's Gamzu Latova. Thank God we put money in those Israeli bonds. Now this paper is turned into gold. That's Gamzu Latova. Another example of Gamzu. It's for the best. We would have stayed there, who knows what would have been. Now that we were forced to leave, we have this. the paper was turned into gold. Maybe we would have never cashed. Now we have no choice. We're going to cash in these bonds. But that's not really what it's about. It's not the moment. Gamzul Tova means every decision God makes at every moment, it's all plays in to this concept of the world has to achieve perfection. And every variable, every nuance, every turn, every event at a subatomic level, at any level, terrestrial, subterranean, everything, it all plays into the program. We have to arrive at a destination. And that destination, the conclusion is called perfection. So God keeps tweaking the system continuously because man's behavior vacillates, and we have multiple people as part of the Jewish people. Everybody contributes, everybody detracts. It's based where what side of the bed we get up on. We start Amidah, we're focused. 3 words of Amidah, we're distracted. A second later, we're back in, out. So exactly, what does that generate? And every one of our babies throughout the day is this way. We're always vacillating. And if we're soaring every moment, it's another level of infusion of positive energy. So everything God does is for the best, whether it's in the negative or the positive, because all that plays to come to the final conclusion, which is called perfection. That's Gamzul Tova. It's something that only the divine could deal with this. Even artificial intelligence, Lahavdil, cannot deal with this. Because we're talking about the word mega is an understanding of what it is. We find that Yosef interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh. He called all his wise men to interpret. They couldn't. He interpreted it. But Yosef did more than interpret the dreams. Yosef gave a solution after he had given interpretation. How are we going to maximize on the bounty that when there's going to be a famine, Egypt will survive the famine, and Egypt will become the wealthiest civilization in the world? Because the world will be starving, and all the wealth of the world comes to Egypt. How are we going to do it? How are we going to guarantee there's no black marketing? There's no embezzlement. How do we do all this? Yosef gave a plan, and he oversaw the plan. And he was in touch with every person who was involved in the system. And it was a success beyond success. Pharaoh says to his wise men, this man, half an hour ago was in the dungeon rotting, this lowly Jew. All of a sudden, Pharaoh sees this man. And Pharaoh was he was a statesman, he was a king of the most advanced civilization. He says to his wise men, have you ever seen a man who's infused with divine genius? Doesn't exist. Yosef's understanding was not human genius. It wasn't artificial intelligence. This was God. This was God's wisdom. This is divine. This is something not to be fathomed. It's beyond. So if this is Yosef to deal with this isolated problem, God who has to juggle all existence and will it based on the program, we have to arrive at a certain point. And it's over thousands of years. Every moment has to be tweaked and infused or detracted, that ultimately it all comes together. And when we arrive at the year 6,000, everything is where it's meant to be. It's like, something years ago, you had an erector set. Or you used to buy, years ago, they used to build model boats. Remember, we used to have model boats, and you had to have certain glue. That glue, you had to make sure the window was open. Otherwise, you'd get asphyxiated from the smell of that glue. That's how bad it was. And I remember, and then afterwards, when you had the boat built, you had little insignias you paste onto the boat. On the deck, on the side of the boat, that's what it was. When you saw just all these little pieces of plastic in that box, it looked just like nothing. But as the boat started to develop, then you saw what was happening. Every piece was integral to ultimately what that boat was going to look like. And even when you put it together, until you put the decals on it, it still didn't look like it was supposed to be. And then when you put the planes on the deck, of the aircraft carrier. Now it's starting to look like an aircraft carrier. So every little bit brought it to another level. So everything contributed, even each thing independently maybe could be seen as something, but in conjunction, it takes on something else. It's a different dimension of reality. And let's see, the key is to build a fleet of ships. So your father had to buy every model, a frigate, an aircraft carrier, a battleship. Everything had to be within that. And when you display it on your dining room table, now we're talking about the equivalent of the Navy. Now we're talking business. One boat looks like nothing. 3 boats look like nothing. When you have an armada of boats, now we're talking about something. Ramchal says, I'm just phrasing it in different contexts, but it's the same idea. Each piece is perfect, but it's only part of a much larger equation. And that's existence continuously. And God wills that. Evil's part of that equation. Good is part of that equation. But ultimately, the end result has to be good, which is called perfection.